Please, and for some reason, please, I'm going to
Okay.
take
Jai Baba, everybody. Hey.
Jai Baba.
So we're continuing. This is talk number 4. This talk about Baba in the future, and we're going to zero in on Baba's statement about the transition from reason to intuition that he said is going to come. And that he said was like the transition from a sensation to reason, and we're spending a long time looking at reason because we're trying to see what's wrong with it. Why would we need to change it? And we'll see that we do. And while this is, I said a couple of times back, I said, I won't talk so fast next time. And then last week I talked very fast. And the reason is because I'm trying to truck through this stuff that I really do need to tell, but I want to get through this history of thinking about the mind and the soul and perception, okay? And I want to get through it because I want to get to the fun, to the good stuff, okay? To intuition so today we're going to do the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. We're going to go as fast as we can. So I still have to talk fast, or I'll try to maybe talk more carefully, slower. I did notice it's just awful how I race, but this is because I can't stand this. I want to get to the good stuff. Got it? Now, once we have, next week, we'll finish the Enlightenment briefly, and we'll go, and hopefully we'll get through the 20th century, and we'll be done, okay? And then, we will then look back, to give an analogy. But probably get it without the drawing, but I love drawing, so. Okay. You can see this okay? Okay, so we're gonna go through history. We started at 600 BC, okay? And so we're gonna end up 2018, what people think in 2018. And then when we get there, finally, in a couple more talks, we'll be able to look back over those 2,600 years and see and go, oh my God, look what we've been doing. Okay, so I have never even heard a talk like this before. Nobody really knows this many philosophers that I'm discussing perfectly or even good enough to get a master's degree. So I'm doing the best that I can, but it is generally accurate, okay? But it's like a generalist's view of these philosophers because people spend their whole life on one philosopher, generally, or one period, sometimes on one book, okay? They spend their career. Okay, so this is talk 4. The mind-body problem is noticed. If you were in the first talk, and you were, Gail, you know what the mind-body problem is roughly. And as I say, today it's going to get even more clear, so if you don't remember it, it's okay, it's going to get real clear. Again, this is the point where the world of smart people, or the world of anybody, I mean, smart people didn't know about the mind-body problem, I mean, the dumb people didn't. When it's the moment when the world of academics suddenly saw there was a problem, and it even got its name, the mind-body problem, okay? And that's what we're going to see happen. Now, last week, oh gosh, I should say this. These are 2 corrections. Since the camera can get them, I don't really need to go over them, okay? But a couple people have emailed me that they've seen some errors in the slides or in what I said, and so we have those corrections there. Okay, so reviewing last week, reviewing the whole thing up till now, we've introduced some ideas that we're going to need to understand when we look back, okay? And the first thing we discussed was the ancient heart, which was a literal physical locus located in space in your chest in the ancient time. And it was associated with the breath, and it leaves the body with the breath. That was the ancient idea of the soul. But they didn't have the word soul. They called it the heart. And then we went over the ancient pre-Socratic philosophers. That means before Socrates, before the ones you've heard of, like Socrates and Aristotle. They were the pre-Socratics. And they were in modern, what's today Turkey, Asia Minor. And they had a method that I explained of looking around in nature and using something from nature like water or air, and then using that to make an analogy, something analogous to that they then sort of projected, and what I said is called hypostatized it, as the cause of the things that are in the world. So it's kind of an odd thing, and I want people, I'm going to say it again, it is looking at the thing you're trying to explain and then using it as an analogy for the thing that's going to explain it. You see a little bit of problem in the thinking there? Okay. The cause was conceived like the phenomenon it was meant to explain. Okay, and then last week we described the word hypostasis. That's treating something that's not a thing like evil. That's not a thing, and treating it like it's a real stuff. Okay, that's called hypostasis, or Santa Claus is a hypostasis. And then finally we introduced the idea in Plato of two worlds, the two-world view, and we went over the cave, and that idea of the two-world view is still with us today. It never went away. It was used in different times, a little different, but you always have this. There's the inside, the interior, your inner subjective private experience. That's a world, in a sense. That's the world you see. That's the world you're looking at. That's the world you're experiencing. And then there's the external world. And the fact that these are two worlds, I've gone over it too many times, I don't need to do it again, but that world isn't in here. So they're separated. And this was the thought of Plato, that our sense perceptions are not reality. They're somehow shadows of reality. So you can see that, and then those, you can go back. Okay, an internal subjective world and an external objective one. Okay, we now leave the ancient world, and we're going to jump 2,000 years. So we're going to speed it up. But I will say what happened in the middle, a little bit. So this is what came before the Renaissance. It's called the Middle Ages, and we're not going to really get in. We're not going to cover it. We're not going to cover the medieval philosophers like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and stuff. We're not going to do that because we're on a particular trajectory. We're talking about a particular thing, and while that's relevant, it's another story. And I would like, when these are all done, I might like to do a story about that in another talk sometime down the line, but not for this. Now, this picture, by the way, is Copernicus, and he lived in the Middle Ages. Copernicus was the one who actually had the idea that the Earth is going around the sun. But he published he was a Franciscan friar or a monk, and Polish, and everybody wrote in Latin so you could read each other's stuff back then. But this is Galileo. I want to say something. I wanted to say this, and I'm trying to not race too much. Say what I want to say. I want to say something about the Middle Ages because I can't stand that people don't know this. Because there was a myth. It was invented in the late 1800s. There was a kind of an anti-Christian kind of trend in the 1800s. As people got more cynical and more materialistic and trying to be scientific. And so they made up a myth that people in the Middle Ages thought that the world was flat. And that Christopher Columbus had to take on the priests and face the Inquisition for saying that the world wasn't flat. But that never happened. They always knew that the world was around since the ancient Greeks. That is just a myth, and it was invented by Washington Irving, the author of Rip Van Winkle. give you the idea of the authority. And this book is by a scholar, I believe it's at the University of California, and he's a leading scholar on this. And this book is called Inventing the Flat Earth. I want just to know people never got that stupid. There never was a people, possibly the American Indians, but there's never been a civilization that ever believed that the Earth was anything but a sphere. And you can look that up on Wikipedia. It's called the Flat Earth Myth, or the myth of the flat Earth.
But they even teach that in school,
They-
like elementary school.
They still
taught
teach
us
it
that.
in undergraduate college. Yeah, there are PhD professors, but they're not PhDs of history. They shouldn't think that. There are other myths like that. Okay, I just wanted to make a pitch for the Middle Ages. Now, I want to explain what happened, because we were talking about Plato and his student Aristotle last week, and that's on tape. But I wanted to say, since we're jumping 2,000 years, I wanted to say, well, what happened with them? So I'm going to say what happened with them. Okay, the people who were real impressed with Plato, they were called Platonists, or later Neoplatonists, and there still are Neoplatonists, so it's a school that continues. And the Aristotelians are people who really think Aristotle had it right, and then there are people who mix it up, but both of them influenced history. But for the most part, there's something happened that you got to see. Plato, okay, by the way, Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great. Even though Alexander the Great decided, well, this is really cool, I'm going to spread it all over the world with swords. He used to send like bugs and twigs and things, plants, back to Aristotle in Macedonia because he knew he was into taxonomy. They remained friends. And Aristotle died 1 year after Alexander the Great, and in about 322 and 323 BC. So, now what happened to the legacy? Plato and Aristotle for a while were both influential as history progresses. 30 AD is approximately the writing of the New Testament begins. Paul was influenced by Plato. They say that the line "through a glass darkly," some people say that was in the Plato's dialogue Phaedo. But you could argue that, but there definitely is Platonic thinking, okay, in the writing of the gospel writers. Some people argue against, say that's not so, but that's what I think, and that I think is a real good case. Now you come down to about 400 AD, and St. Augustine, who Baba said was one of his favorite Christian saints, St. Lord Maher, he actually never read Plato because, see, they stopped having the books around when the world became Christian shortly, right around here, about the time of the conversion of Constantine. It was like, that's pagan, we're starting on a new footing. So the books weren't around for Augustine, but I don't think, of Plato. But what he read was some of the writing of a Platonist named Plotinus. And this so moved him that he essentially caused his conversion. He suddenly understood the Bible. He suddenly understood what the whole Christian thing, and then he created Christian theology to this day. And so it's a straight line out of Plato. So there's a mystical stream that comes down through Plato. And now in the Crusades, around 1100, there was the Muslims had taken the books. Aristotle so the books had been preserved from about 800 to 1100 by the Muslims in the Middle East, who had gotten them from the Byzantine Empire, translated them into Arabic. And in the Crusades, they got to the Holy Land, or close to it, and they rediscovered these, and they brought them back to Europe. They were retranslated back into Latin from the Arabic. So it goes Greek, and then to the Arabic, or it might have been in Greek, Latin, Arabic, Latin. Today our translations are from the original Greek. They have found earlier sources, okay? So, at that point, they got so interested in Aristotle, that they kind of forgot about this. And the mystical stream basically stopped in Europe. The mystical stream went on in the Eastern Church, like in Syria and Turkey and stuff like that. But there was a big interest in Aristotle, and Aristotle, of course, is less mystical. Remember the picture of Aristotle saying it's about the earth, and Plato pointing up in the painting by Raphael last week. So we begin to think very differently around here, and then it reaches the point in the Middle Ages that philosophers, they were called scholastics, the scholastics. They were schoolmen. They had these universities like Oxford, you know, and they would sit around and argue philosophy, and you could settle an argument just by saying Aristotle said it. That's how it was. That's how important Aristotle got. And so for a long time, that's what philosophy was in like getting the right interpretation of Aristotle. They could explain everything. But when we got here, this is the big. When we got not here, they say the Renaissance started in 1300 AD. That's a common thing I read online, but I think it's later. I think it starts later, about 1438, with the Council of Florence. But anyway, in the Renaissance was inspired largely by Aristotle, and it was meant to be a revival of ancient pagan thinking. It's funny, but somehow it was also incorporated into Christianity. It was kind of complicated, but that's what the Renaissance was. It's a rebirth of the past, of Rome, essentially. And it started in Italy, which had been Rome. So anyway, we get here to Galileo in 1623 AD. And then suddenly everything changes. And you see this petering out of Aristotle, okay? He saw and others begin to scientifically explore the world, and they started seeing that Aristotle was wrong about a lot of things. And this is now we're gonna get into the thing. This had a huge impact about the mind-body problem. Just kind of, you would think that's odd, but it does. And last week I explained how Aristotle solved the mind-body problem. Now remember that Plato doesn't have a mind-body problem because he doesn't see it as a problem. He doesn't think we see the real world at all, but he doesn't see that as a problem because it's like one day you will unite with reality, okay? So even though what we see is not the real world, that's not a problem. So he kind of has a kind of two-world view, but it's not a problem for Plato. But in Aristotle, he needed, for reasons we'll see, he needed us to be seeing the world really just like it is. So he wanted to be an empiricist, which means we find out about reality by looking at things around us. Got it? So it's very important that this be just like the real thing. So what I see is what it is, because I'm going to be scientific based on these perceptions, okay? So they got to be in, you'll understand in a moment, if you don't now. So this is Galileo, and those are the dates. And what I'm going to say, what some of the, how Aristotle, his argument for why it was we see the world like it is. I hope everybody follows what I mean by that. But well, I'll read this before I draw some. So Aristotle's arguments for vertical, which means true, perception of the world outside of us. Because they all believed that there was a world outside of us, and you weren't seeing it directly. You were seeing representations of it. Okay? I said this last week. It relied on accepting certain of his beliefs because it was a real complicated way he explained how we are sure that we're seeing the world really the way it is, and there's no mysterious Platonic, metaphysical world. Got it? In other words, there's no God, there's no spooky soul. It's like we're looking at it, okay? So, the first one was that the world was ordered in these perfect pairs, where one thing was passive and one thing was active. And Plato had the idea that your eyes and your ears, and they're completely the passive thing. And whatever's coming to them, it's active. And because this is passive, it doesn't play any role in perception. We know that's not true today. We know that our eyes and our optic nerves and our brains and all this electricity has a lot to do with what we end up seeing. But he believed this was passive. And I remember, I think you laughed because I said about the babies. Was it you? Maybe it wasn't you. He believed that women's bodies had nothing to do with having a baby. That the male sperm went inside the woman and it worked as a carpenter and it built a baby, and it used she just supplied the raw material, and so kind of, that's true. That's what Aristotle thought. So he had a very weird idea that everything had to be just passive or active. So if perception is totally passive, then that's one argument that we see the world as it is. That's an idea that would begin to fall apart. Now, the other was that everything was perfect. Everything, the universe had a perfect order, had a perfect symmetry, all of this, okay? And the next thing, but this fell apart when Galileo looked through his telescope and he saw that the moons of Jupiter were not round. Because Aristotle said everything had to be perfect, everything had to be perfect spheres, okay? And shortly after, Kepler discovered, also the orbits, everything went around the Earth. The orbits of the stars around the Earth, that had to be a perfect circle, okay? But Kepler realized that actually they were like all ellipses. They were shaped like this, and then you'd have the thing here. I mean, I exaggerated, but they weren't circles. Then the other one was Galileo took on the idea that the Earth doesn't go around, the sun doesn't go around the Earth goes around the sun. But Aristotle had said it was the other. But he made convincing arguments. So Aristotle's falling apart. Got that? Now there's another one I want to say here, which is that, everything in life, according to Aristotle, has its purpose. In fact, the essence of a thing, what makes a thing what it is its intended function, okay? He didn't think that God had a purpose in mind. He just thought that's the way the world was arranged. It's just so organized like a mind. He didn't think there was a mind like thinking it. Just kind of projected his own sort of like anal retentiveness onto the universe. But he believed that the eyes, again, this is like from the side, an eye. I hope it looks like an eye. Helps to have a nose. And the nose, okay, the nostrils here and the ears. Their intended purpose is to give you true beliefs. That's their only purpose. That's what they are. That's their essence. In his world, that all made sense, that this made sense. It was an argument that you had to be experiencing the world exactly how it is, because that's the entire purpose for these eyes and ears and noses and skin and everything. That's why they exist. How could they be wrong? That would be illogical, according to Aristotle. So, as these scientists like Galileo began to pierce the veneer of this idea of a kind of perfectly ordered world and find all kinds of imperfection in it, it's creating a crisis for the belief that we see the world as it is. Okay, so it already lays the groundwork for the possibility that we don't. This doesn't establish that we don't, but Galileo saw a couple of things that actually established that we don't. Okay, see that statue? Okay, he took I wish I brought a feather. I forgot to bring a feather. I love props. So he writes in a book called the Assayer, which I mentioned. I think Assayer is a person who tests gold, see if it's really gold, I think. So it's like a metaphor for the one who's finding the truth. And he noticed that, Aristotle believed that everything on the outside was same on the inside. So if there's color, if you're seeing color, there was color outside you. Or, like they say, well, I won't say that because it'll confuse you. Okay, so we have this statue here. Oh, so this. I got a statue up there. So Galileo, they would have had statues like this in Italy at the time, from copies of Roman stuff. Okay, so if you tickle this statue, it's not going to feel tickled. Okay? Now, he intuited from that the tickle can't really be in the feather. It's kind of strange, you don't think about it another time. But it makes sense when you read it when he says it. That was the experiment that he had in mind, is that if I tickle somebody under their arm, they start laughing, but then he said you could take the same feather and you could put it on their eye and it wouldn't tickle. And you can put it on some other part of the body and they wouldn't even hardly feel it. Okay, well that's not how it should be in Aristotle. It should all be the same because the skin was an organ. It's all one, okay? The flesh, it wasn't the skin, the flesh is an organ. Just like the eyes are an organ, the ears, and it's one organ. And it should always be getting the same sensation, okay? Anyway, Galileo realized some of these sensations are not outside of us. They're not out there. It's something going on in us, okay? I hope that makes sense. It does. But I just want to get through this. Okay. Now, here's another one. Galileo was so brilliant that he was one of the first people to come up with relativity. A very profound form of relativity that had to do with gravity. But it's on Wikipedia, and we don't need to go that far into it, but I'm just going to say something the very simpler part of his relativity. Now, imagine you're on a ship, and it's on the dock. Here's the dock. It's got, there's the dock, and back here there's a ship. Okay, there's the water. Okay, and the ship is about to leave. Okay, and there's a guy standing here on the dock. Okay. Okay. Now, there's this little portholes, okay, in the thing. Now, imagine, it's a terrible drawing. Imagine you're inside the ship, and it's sitting there at dock, and it slowly we've all seen this in subways and stuff. It slowly starts to move, so you can't feel that it's moving, the ship. And he looks out the ship, and it looks like, this guy's moving. True? It looks like he's moving, and it feels like you're standing still. Okay? That's a simple form of relativity. But from this guy's point of view, the ship is moving. So which is it? This doesn't work with Aristotle. This because you're supposed to get true information, okay, through your senses. And here Galileo is showing again that you're not. That is determined by conditions in the observer. And there are so many other examples, we don't need to go into them, but it's a big subject in itself. Like I said, even the ancient Greeks.
And when Plato got it right, because we don't expect, according to
you're absolutely right. Basically, Galileo is realizing 2,000 years after Plato, he's realizing what Plato already said, but he doesn't realize that.
He doesn't know Plato said.
No.
Did Aristotle, like if you compare Aristotle to Baba's teaching, did Aristotle get anything right?
Yes, I'm going to say that because I wanted to say that and I forgot to. So thank you. Yes, it's important, okay? There's this idea that the West is really, the Greek world wasn't really the West, first of all. It's kind of in the middle, okay? Like, where's the West? Why is America the West? Okay, you just got to get over these ideas. It's just where this kind of thinking really got like amped, okay? And then kind of to look at the world coming out of it for this kind of thing. Sufism is not just based on sitting there reading the Quran, okay? Sufism is mysticism, and mysticism is philosophically worked out into systems, okay? This is a fact. And you've heard of like Ibn Arabi, he is a philosopher, but Sufism refers to Ibn Arabi, okay? But he's also a mystic. Well, they were using Aristotle more. They had both. As I said, they collected them from the Byzantine Empire as soon as their empire started, the Muslim empire started to expand. They wanted to learn everything in the world. It just was sort of an impulse at the time. And so they scoured the world for these ancient books, and they found them, and they translated them into Arabic, so that's your answer. They were using Aristotle, and they were using Plato. And some Sufi schools, because I asked you know that Baba lover who's a Sufi professor, you know him? He was in Fayetteville. Talat.
Oh.
Yeah, I asked Talat, and he told me, I said, dude, can you tell me a Sufi that's Sufi school that's from Plato? Because I'm more into Plato. So he sent me a wonderful book. I ordered the book, Interlibrary. I read the book. Okay, it's there. And then, but mostly it was Aristotle. So that's the answer. There's also, just to make this even more exciting, you can look it up on Wikipedia. There's what's called Greco-Buddhism. See, when Alexander the Great made it to India, he opened the Silk Road, and ideas went both ways. Okay, but you know, Alexander was always pushing a Greek thought. That was sort of what he was kind of doing, because he had the teacher Aristotle. He was kind of like, we're gonna go public with this. So this actually has an effect on Buddhism. Okay, so it's just at that point probably even more the other way, because they would be the Greeks at that for a short time were more dominant than the Indians were. Later, you've heard of Ashoka and the Buddhist empire, the empire that Ashoka made. You know who Ashoka is? He was an Indian. Either he or his father, as a boy, saw Alexander the Great when he got to India, and saw him like a horse, and inspired him to create that empire. So you have, it's not like we have been taught in our, okay, so that answers that. So Plato affirmed, that's what I said, just what you said. Plato affirmed without them realizing it, okay? Galileo is affirming that Plato was right, okay? I would like to give a talk eventually about especially the mystical stream of Western Christian mysticism that comes out of Plato, because I do know it really pretty damn good. So I do want to do that sometime. So Galileo held out Galileo then came up with a theory. And his theory is called corpuscularism. And I don't know if he invented it, but him and his cohorts. It's a school, okay? And I have to explain, and it's what you heard in high school, by the way. And corpuscularism is basically, they don't call it that anymore. It's called science. But it's a little more developed than that. But it goes like this. I gotta explain corpuscularism. Oh, sorry. God. All right. corpuscularism. Okay. I didn't do any slides on it, so that's okay. It goes like this. It's what you've heard before. It goes, there's particles, like they're what we call atoms. And so they arrange themselves in such a way that they create textures on things. And a certain texture, okay, or configuration geometrically, that goes on your tongue will result in a certain flavor. Okay, I got taught this in high school. This is what comes from Galileo, and then Robert Boyle, I think that's his name, after him. And then the nose is you have some of these particles in there in the air, like in the mist, and they're certain shapes, okay? And they touch on the nodules inside the nose, and then if this shape will smell good and this one will smell poopy, okay? So, and then you have particles in the air, and they're wiggling because there's these vibrations, okay? They're wiggling, wiggle, wiggle, and then they come up to a little drum called your eardrum, and they wiggle the eardrum. And when they wiggle the eardrum, you hear that as a particular pitch. If it wiggles this fast, it feels like ah, and if it wiggles like this, whoa, okay? So there's kind of like a correlation, get it? To how it is. Of course, it's all theory still, but it's a good theory, and it's the one that scientists still use. And even if you hear about, oh, they're into really deep stuff now, scientists that work in labs will tell you, actually, we use this corpuscular theory, okay. I was going to get into something else, but I'm not. I'm going to move on. Okay. Now, this slide is here. We don't really need it, but it shows the mind-body problem. We'll just look at it again. Maybe every time we go through this, we should. That is, you got a picture in your mind, but it's not the tree. You don't have a tree in there. So you infer from your experience of a tree that there's a tree. But you have no way to know if the real tree is like the tree in your head, because you have no way to get outside of yourself in order to compare them, which is actually kind of an absurd idea, because it's not talking about getting out of your body, it's talking about getting out of your mind. You gotta get, so that's the skeptical part of the mind-body problem. Now, this problem had not been noticed yet. It had not been named yet. And what we're gonna say now is how this happened. It's kind of exciting. It's kind of exciting story to tell. It has to do with a guy, well, René Descartes. You've all heard of him. He's like the most famous philosopher amongst Americans for some reason. Everybody got a Descartes joke. And he's the one who said, I think, therefore I am. And Descartes was French. He wrote in Latin, like everybody else. And he was first to do a couple things. He was the first person. Remember I said that the ancient heart was in your chest? Well, later there was after Aristotle and stuff, Plato thought that the thinking was in your head, but he was ahead of his time. Everybody else thought it was in his chest. Aristotle thought it was in his chest, which is ironic, but it's true. But later in Rome, they don't know, give you a year, there was a doctor named Galen, and they started figuring out that there was this brain from dissections and stuff, okay? So by the time, or at least that there was but they still thought of a mind, and it was kind of mixed up. That's all I can tell you. But they had gotten that far. Now, but it's still, your soul was either in your head or in your chest, okay? It's physically located. It leaves your body when this is sort of how we still think kind of like this, but not by the time we get done. We're going to see it differently. Okay. He was the first one to think that the soul, and without explaining how he came to this, because it's like I could, and maybe I will, but I kind of want to get through everything. He thought the soul is not a physical thing. It's non-physical. It's immaterial, which is what we would say today, even though we still think of it like it is, you know. And it has no spatial location. Got it? Because that's like a thing has a spatial location. So it doesn't have a locus anymore. It's sort of, you can't even say it's everywhere. It's not that kind of a thing. It doesn't have a space feature, okay? It's that immaterial. And because of this view, he was the first to make the mind-body problem real apparent to people. Okay, I'm going to try to tell his meditation. He was old. It was toward the end of his life. It was a few years before he died. He decided he would wait till he was smart as he thought he was ever going to be, but not quite dead. So he tried to time it right to be as smart as he could be, but before he was dead. And he hit it just about right. He died a couple years later. But he sat down by a fire. We'll come back to these. So he sat down by a fire. He was a very unhealthy, small little man. And then had a candle. And he decided to get rid of all of his appointments and spend, I think he did this over several nights. And he decided to meditate. Well, I should say why he's doing this. Descartes was completely up on Galileo, okay? He had been raised in a scholastic education, because everybody was. And he had heard all about Aristotle. That's all you hear when you went to school, Aristotle. But he had then, as a youth, read Galileo writing, and he was impressed. And so he was very he got it that there was a crisis, that we don't know what we thought we did, because if Aristotle's wrong and we based everything on Aristotle, well, what the hell? That's how bad it was. They were starting over. And so he was a mathematician and a philosopher, and he decided, well, I'm going to have to reboot all philosophy. We're going to have to start all new. But we have to start on some principle that we definitely know. Because we can't rely on, he didn't want to rely just on the Bible, you know, because maybe we're interpreting it wrong, or it could be wrong. He didn't want to rely on authority. He wanted to be sure. He was what's called a rationalist. He wanted to have a really strong reason, intellectually, for some belief that you could never doubt and it could never be wrong. And then, once he could find that, he felt, then I could build from that. Because I'd have something. It would be like bedrock, like you need to build a house on a foundation. Got it? So, he sat down by the fire, and he tried to doubt, like, could this be wrong? Could this be wrong that I've always thought? And a lot of them he immediately saw, well, yeah, it could be wrong. There's no good case for it. But then he got an idea that he would do a thought experiment. And he wasn't worrying, and the thought experiment is called the evil demon. In other translations from the Latin, it's called the evil genius. Okay? And but demon is more common. He thought, he knew God was good, wouldn't deceive him, you know, but what if there was an evil demon in his apartment, and the evil demon was sending him all his thoughts to trick him, just because he was evil? And this is the picture. In the 17th century, Descartes came up with a thought experiment. He believed that God created the world, but what if everything we see and experience is a vision created by a powerful evil demon? What if the demon is controlling my mind and creating everything I experience? Okay? So, then he thought, this helped him to discard thoughts. He thought, oh yeah, that could be true, okay? Because all my perceptions would be wrong. They could be put there by the demon. Do you need to go? You go.
No, I need to stand up.
Oh, that's fine.
I can't just sit very long.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Has everybody seen The Matrix?
Yeah.
Have you, Rich? The Matrix? with Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was like 1999.
Yeah, I don't know, if I did, I forgot.
Okay, it's the same idea. Keanu Reeves is Neo, and he doesn't know, but he's like hooked up to a computer, and it's feeding him
Right.
this stuff, and it's all malicious. So it's very much like the evil demon. The only difference is that it's feeding him like the Matrix, which is like everybody walking around the street. But in Descartes, it's worse. It's feeding him even his own thoughts. Got that? So it's thoughts about it. So if in the Matrix, Neo might see, because he's hooked up, might send him a signal of like a dog, a cat, okay? But he would still either like or dislike the dog, But in this, even the liking the dog and the disliking the dog, that's fake, okay? It's not, it's real intense, okay? And he had a realization. And the realization was that even his doubts about the reality of the external world, he could accept, could be being fed to him by an evil demon, okay? So that might not even be his thought. But then there had to be somebody that was having the doubt. Okay? And that, he felt, was the one thing that could not possibly be wrong. For even if an evil demon were putting his thoughts in his mind, someone or something was experiencing these doubts. So even if the world was an illusion, he had to exist. And that's where you get, okay, and from this thought, he came to the conclusion he existed, and then he had a starting position point. And this is how he rebuilt the world from it. Remember I said he was going to find a foundation? He felt you can't doubt that. That has to be true, or you contradict yourself. Okay? Some people say that argument is strong. Some argue with it. But it's very interesting. Okay? And it kind of goes with Baba, by the way. That's the one thing, yeah. And Baba talks about you can't really disbelieve in God because you would have to disbelieve in your own existence, which you can't really do because then somebody would have to be disbelieving in it. Okay, so you can't really do that. So this is how he built the world back. It's really kind of cool, even though it's sort of silly. Okay, a lot of it's from Thomas Aquinas, who came like around the 1200s before him, but everybody had read him. It goes, well, now I know that I exist, and I know that that's a mind, because I know what a mind is because I got one, and I kind of feel that. Okay, that's my soul, my mind. They equated the one thing. Baba separates them, but they. So he said, and if there's a mind, there has to be a most perfect mind. That's from what's called the ontological argument from St. Thomas Aquinas, about 400 years earlier. But I think that's kind of doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's how we thought it. It has to be a more perfect mind, and we'll call that God. It has to be an absolutely perfect mind. And so we'll call that God. And now, if God were deceptive, then he would be less than perfect, and therefore he wouldn't be God by definition, because we just said it has to be perfect. So therefore God, it wouldn't be possible for God to be deceiving me with my experience, and so therefore my experience is exactly as it is on the external, on the outside world, and therefore because God wouldn't deceive me is the same on the outside world, therefore all the thinking I've done about things like apples and chairs, and the conclusions I've reached, like mathematics, that has to be true because God gave me reason, and I was using reason, and the reason has to be right because, well, it looks right. And so everything came back. Okay? But what he didn't realize is nobody really bought the other stuff. They were very interested in that he could doubt everything. Okay? The world, Descartes was big. Okay? And because it's Latin, they can read him in Germany, and they got it, and they can read him in England, and then I say, the way I see it, it's like if you ever saw Lord of the Rings, there's a moment where Frodo and Sam are running. Frodo puts on the ring, and they've distracted Sauron, the Eye. They've distracted him over here with this fake battle, so they give Frodo time to throw the ring in, and then Frodo, he puts on the ring, and suddenly in the movie, the eye which shines a light, okay, like that's its seeing, okay, representing its seeing, it suddenly goes, and it turns on Frodo. It's a very frightening moment. It's great. But I couldn't find the tower picture, but it looks like this. The world suddenly saw the mind-body problem. And it was everything, okay? At that point, nothing was ever going to be the same again. All philosophy since is commentary on this evil demon. It's all commentary on Descartes' meditation. They didn't buy his explanation, how he put it back together. They saw he had taken it apart. Now, there's a special kind of mind-body problem. I could almost skip it maybe, but I think I can do it quickly. The original idea of the mind-body problem is not what I just said, because where's a mind-body problem in what I just said? It's a skeptical. Is there an external world? That's all, okay? But or we could call it the mind-body skeptical problem. How do we know that there's body, meaning physicality, okay? But here's what they originally used the word mind-body problem for. Descartes, when he was a boy, he went to the park in Paris and he saw these mechanical birds that were hydraulic, and they think that they ran on like steam and water, and they ran through tubes, and so they went, okay, he was very impressed. And he came up with a strange theory for how the mind, see, because the mind was not physical, okay, and it didn't have any location, how did the mind control the body? Since the body is physical, how does something that's not physical push or pull on something? Wouldn't it like kind of go through, you know what I'm saying? Like Casper the Ghost, he would pass through walls. How does this not material mind, now this is what he thought. That is, he would dissect a lot of dogs. They say he dissected his wife's pet dog, nailed it to the table, and dissected it, vivisected it alive. And he believed that because the dog doesn't have a soul, that it was just like the sound of squeaky parts in a machine. And so he would just go on doing it with, so, wow, creepy guy. But he found in these bodies the pineal gland. And you hear a lot about the pineal gland, but just trust, this is where it begins. Descartes thought that the pineal gland that he found in the center of the brain, it kind of hangs down. He felt that the soul, somehow, because the pineal gland was sort of half physical, half mental, okay, and so the soul was a little like Quasimodo. So that's the Hunchback of Notre Dame, Quasimodo. Quasimodo sits in a tower, and he rings the bell, oh, right? Well, the soul has this, can move the pineal gland back and forth, okay, to and fro, like a bell in a tower, okay? And this was connected by pipes. Okay, by the way, he studied hydraulics when he was in the military, so he's really into those mechanical birds and pipes. And the pineal gland was connected to hydraulics, which he felt that a fluid ran through the hydraulics. Because, by the way, when they would do side dissections, they didn't know what these things were. They conflated nerves with veins, they didn't have any, and they're all flat when you do the dissection, because the thing's dead usually, well, unless you're doing a vivisection. But they don't know what that is flowing. Some of it's blood, they don't know what it is. So he had that it was psych, I think. No, he didn't think it was psych. was called animal spirits. That's what it was called, animal spirits. He believed that animal spirits ran through this, and I have a whole book on the history of animal spirits. Anyway, animal spirits ran through this, and then that goes down your arm, and just like today, you know, it would be able to pull and lift your arm, okay? And kind of like our idea, but he didn't have the idea of electricity doing this. He thought it was hydraulic. And the mind, which was not physical, the only thing it could interact with was the pineal gland. And so it would push it like this, like a lever, okay? And then it could move the body by pulling on the pineal gland. Very stupid idea, right? And the problem was it didn't convince anybody. And the reason it didn't convince anybody, because they said, I still don't get how this immaterial, non-physical, sort of non-spatial, unlocated soul or mind pushes on the pineal gland. Like they were okay with the pipes, but it doesn't make sense. So this came to be called substance dualism. That was his well, I don't think Descartes called it this, but his critics came to call. He did talk about two substances: this mind substance, which was not physical, and physical substance that was like in space, had weight and stuff. And this is called substance dualism. Sorry, I'm in the way. Dualism. Two substances, mind and body. Now do you see where mind-body problem comes from? There was substance dualism. There was an immaterial mind stuff, okay, that the soul was made out of and God was made out of. And then there was stuff that was made out of, well, the word body didn't mean like somebody's body in those days, but in this case it worked. It meant bodies like celestial bodies, foreign body. Got a foreign body in, under here. It just meant something physical. Mind-body problem. They meant interaction problem. So he tried to solve what he saw was an interaction problem, but it created the problem because nobody was convinced. It only made them see the problem. If he hadn't said anything, they might not have noticed. You see, by his solution to his problem, there was like, hey man, you got a problem. So Descartes had a real big problem. And that's their original meaning. We no longer, philosophy after that became a campaign to try to get rid of any kind of substance dualism, because they said substance dualism doesn't work. Everybody agrees with that. Materialists agree with that. I don't know. I think there are Christians that actually are Cartesians. They still hold out. There are Christians that want it to work, not like this, but that there are two substances and they're not sure how to solve the problem, but they're sort of still back here with Descartes. But the problem is to find some kind of a monism, some kind of way to bring these together. And the two main ideas has been either everything is mental, maybe everything's mental, that'll be an idea, that's called idealism. And the other one is called reductive materialism, that's like, there is no mind, there is no soul, there is no consciousness, everything's just physical. Now, that was actually Descartes' idea for dogs. They didn't have souls. They were purely machines. Just purely machines. And the thing that made their pineal gland move was just they got a signal from like a fire, and then they knew to run. All right. Descartes never noticed the mind-body causal problem. In talk one, I said that there's even he got there's a connection problem, but which he felt he solved. He saw a skeptical problem, but then he felt he solved that. The fact that how do we know there's an external world? He felt he solved that because God is good, remember? But he never noticed how experience happens at all. Okay, and the reason The reason that he thought that is because, remember, Aristotle said everything, the essence of a thing, what it is for a thing to be what it is its function. And so your mind, whatever it is by definition, it is the ability to perceive. So they didn't have to question it. They just like, well, that's the very meaning of the word of mind in Aristotle. So that's why it never came up. But it did come up in the 20th century. And it's important. And it is important. And that's what I call the mind-body causal problem. Well, after talking about it, we decided that we've already gone a little over an hour, and I agreed to make these an hour long. And so we're going to split this talk in half, but it's okay because we're going to add a little more than just what was left to next week. But it just happens that this slide's perfect because it shows everything that we're going to cover next week. Next week, we're going to discuss the reactions to Descartes. Remember I said that the eye of Sauron was suddenly on the mind-body problem? It was like, whoa! Okay, and it's still on it, okay? And they've been trying stuff ever since, and it's not been working, okay? And it's important, and we'll see it's real important as we go on. We're going to see, this is really important. We really need to figure this out. They're doing some bad stuff because they don't get it. But like torturing people because of Descartes, okay? You know? Of course, they've always tortured people, but now they've got an excuse. Okay, so what we're going to cover is the reaction to that, and the three philosophers we're going to cover are George Berkeley, for whom Berkeley is named, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. And then we will, if we can, that's all we're going to do next week, because that'll be big enough. And they're all going to give a response to this mind-body problem. Every single one of them is going to have some kind of reaction to it, and Kant will bring. Okay, so that's it. Okay. And as you see at the bottom, it said, is this still on? In this talk, we have time for only the first two. So that's what I thought. So next week, we'll have time for all three. And Kant's really big. So it'll be just definitely enough for an hour next week. Thanks. Jay Bala.